And while I'm doing that, I will just share again my kind of quick bio. So again, my name is Hunter Hevelin. I'm a food and agricultural systems planner. I have a consulting firm called Supersistence that I work mostly with nonprofit and government clients on everything from planning to policy, a lot of kind of data-driven efforts. And one of my favorite efforts is working with the Hawaii Farmers Union as the advocacy director. And if I can figure out how to turn on my slideshow here, share my screen. Correct screen, I hope. Oh,
yeah, that's good.
Promising-ish. All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of some of how the Hawaii Farmers Union has been approaching our policy work in the past while, and then end with a little bit of kind of what we've been tackling this year. So for those unaware, Hawaii Farmers Union is actually a local chapter of the National Farmers Union, which is the longest operating producer membership organization in the country. We have a mission and vision that is very much focused on regenerative agriculture, community justice in a way in terms of social justice, as well as values and practices. The inherited approach from the National Farmers Union is this triad of cooperation, legislation, and education. And we've certainly been cooperating to the extent that we put union and united in our name, because we were just so together. There's a longer history there. But on the education side, we do run an producer education program called the Farm Apprentice Mentorship Program, and then I'll be sharing some about our legislative activities. So in my role, which previously had been titled this kind of government relations representative, I'm tasked with building local and to some degree national cooperation and relationships to work with various entities, building sort of education around our policy priorities, both within our membership and within the legislature and with other elected officials. And then also, of course, advocating on some of those key issues. So on the cooperation front, locally, we work with a lot of different organizations, many represented here, from the Local Food Coalition, Hawaii Alliance for Progressive Action, Purple Maya, and the Food Plus Policy effort, along with some other kind of networked entities like the Hawaii Hunger Action Network, Farm to School Hui, and then nationally, in the past few years, have been a member of the National Healthy Soils Policy Network. And this has afforded us some mini grants over the past couple of years, which has enabled some of the Talk Story and Circle State efforts that I'm going to share about a little later. On the education side, so trying to get the word out about our various priorities and their status during the legislative session and before and after. We do have a member email system. We're sort of in the process of transitioning our CRM and all of that. So we haven't been as fast out the gate with getting the word out and through that mechanism of I'll say yet this year, but it is an infrastructure that we're working to develop further. And then, of course, education with legislators. So there's a number of different folks that we work with both before, during, and after the session to try and ensure that there's greater education about our key issues. In 2023, put in about 15 different bills, tracked about 100, testified on about 70 or so. A lot of these focused on taxes and tax relief and tax credits, farm to school programming, food access, and organic waste management. Each year, I spend an innumerable amount of time making a very complex way of tracking all this stuff that probably takes more time than the actual testimony itself. And so there's the previous year's efforts can be linked there. And this was essentially just a restatement of that. In terms of our outcomes from last year, and this kind of gives a sense, I think, just more about the policy landscape in general, is that we did have some wins the hemp industry, for the coffee industry in terms of pesticide through working closely with partners with the Hawaii Hemp Farmers Association, Coffee Growers Associations, and HAPA. Each of these, in most cases, were the result of multi-year efforts, right? So while I will be sharing about how unsuccessful some of our key priorities have been already this year, it is not to say that we are wholly dismayed, but it is sort of a par for the course, is that these things take a lot of time. Particularly, some of our key priorities over many years that made it very, very close, really to the last days of the previous session, were focused on producer income tax credits, establishing a healthy soils program within the Department of Agriculture, and having a transportation reimbursement tax credit for producers, particularly to enable shipping between islands as an opportunity to expand markets. That's what we did in 2023. In the build-up for this session, I went around the state and met with many of our chapters and our membership to have what we framed as talk story sessions to really try and better understand what the key issues and opportunities were that were viewed as the top line things to be addressed. And so this list here should come as no surprise, from climate resilience to biosecurity, which I would say actually is one of the key ones that had arisen maybe more than previous years. So a lot of concern expressed in chapters across the state, of which we have 16 in every island. That agricultural labor, interests in addressing soil health and water security, waste management, et cetera, all were some of the issues that were addressed. In terms of how those got translated into priorities, again, as we are part of this national entity, there was a process by which we pursue determining some of these priorities. So we actually have an annual membership meeting where everybody can put forward their own internal policy ideas. This is the short list that came out of this year's, and that then gets ratified by our membership through a voting process, and then informs what we will then pursue during the legislative session. It's not necessarily being explicit about what a particular bill will focus on, but ideally is framed not quite as an oracular statement, and not entirely detailed, but somewhere kind of in the middle, where it's giving us direction so that myself and ideally our legislative committee can then sort of help prioritize and determine what we actually focus on. So again, somewhat echo of the previous slide here, you're seeing regenerative agriculture, workforce development, food and nutrition programs, and another key piece that came up was addressing and supporting the development of food systems for Maui County in particular, in response to as part of relief and recovery efforts. This year so far, tracking about 200 bills. Now that's, I think, down to about 100 or so, as they're starting to winnow pretty rapidly after, as we're nearing crossover, which is where the bills move from their first chamber to their second, where they're moving from the House to the Senate or vice versa, should they've made it through their first set of referred committees. Testified on about 37 or so bills so far. Again, here's a link where you can see some of what we've been tracking and focused on. In terms of the key things that I've been tracking or excited about, a main one this year that I think has particular import to that last bullet point on food system development in Maui County and really across the state is a farm to food bank program. And so this is a bill that is now in its third or fourth iteration. I believe previously we had written it so that it would house the program within the Office of Community Services in the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations. However, with changes in leadership and vision at the Department of Agriculture, we are happy to now have the program be housed within the Department of Agriculture. They actually had pursued in their budget for this year to have, I'm going to mix up the numbers here, I believe it was a $15 million budget request that the Department of Budget and Finance then recommended be $1 million, and the governor then put in $720,000 into the budget, into his budget request. The versions that are still alive, again, have that house within the Department of Agriculture, and this would be a mechanism that would provide funding for food banks to purchase from farms, food hubs, etc., local goods that they would then be able to route out to their partner agencies, or what were commonly thought of as, food pantries or soup kitchens and those type of kind of direct service community entities. Other key programs that are still alive and somewhat related is the Bucks program, which provides it's essentially an incentive for local purchasing for those who are receiving SNAP benefits, formerly known as food stamps, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And this allows, through a network of retailers across the state that have been cultivated through the efforts of the Food Basket and the Hawaii Good Food Alliance, a whole slew of places where SNAP recipients can go and, through this double up benefit, essentially receive local produce at half price. Some other related efforts on the pesticide front. We have a pesticide advisory committee that, like some other statutes in the state, still has preference for the sugar and pineapple industries. So there is a bill that would replace those sugar and pineapple representatives with representatives from the coffee and diversified agricultural industries. This is really a key aspect of, from my perspective, of governance of restricted use pesticides and other types of pesticides that can be useful for the agricultural industry, but as Annie so datifully displayed, can also have significant environmental and community and health impacts. So we believe that update is critical. Last year, I believe I also put in a bill that would have updated our state planning goals for agriculture, which unsurprisingly currently still list supporting the sugar and pineapple industries. So part of this is sort of really wonky, buried in the weeds, updating of what should happen. And then other pieces I think have a little bit more leverage to them, which is to say things like that pesticide advisory committee, which may make it so that in the future, the pesticide reporting efforts that Annie mentioned may not be as hard fought. Some other related pieces are, there's a nursery licensing program that's really about kind of biosecurity and controlling the transfer of known pest and invasive pest vectors, that being the nursery industry. So this would have a licensing program, sort of a registry, as well as some other ag workforce housing bills. Some others that I'm sad to say have been top priorities, but have already passed on for this session, are this transportation tax credit, which, as I mentioned earlier, would have subsidized or had sort of served as a reimbursement for moving produce and agricultural products inter-island. Related to that was a producer income tax credit that, if you were a full-time farmer, rancher, or fisher, would have essentially taken a chunk off of your gross for calculating your tax bill, which a number of other states have done. Fortunately, that one has also seems to have passed on so far for this year. And then again, our long-labored Healthy Soils program, which is intended to create a program within the Department of Agriculture that would house existing efforts like our compost reimbursement program, which is currently a permanent program, or the for crop pilot program, which I believe has a couple years left in that effort. So the idea being that this Healthy Soils programming would house funding mechanisms like those, could pursue demonstration projects, and conceivably also develop other incentive programs to facilitate the adoption of what could be called conservation agricultural practices, or otherwise known as sort of regenerative agriculture, or just good land management. Some other bills, a number of the meat processing bills that would have established a local meat processing industry have already died off. This is a particular import because currently the vast majority of our processing capacity, even including those that are on state lands and state facilities, has been absorbed by the Hawaii Meats, which now runs, I believe it's Kama'aina Beef. Essentially, an Idaho billionaire now controls a significant share in the 90th percentile of our meat processing industry, which is having effects for access for this critical portion of having a protein industry here. I think barring other questions, that might be all I have for now. But looking forward to some further discussion, and I will pass it over to Kelsey.